And so make sure that you've got a good handle on those individuals that are going to be, you might look at them as like champions, but then also add in other sorts of folks into the mix. Be sure you've got a Teams group for chat for your AI council. Use forms to log information, right? And to describe what works and what doesn't, and then evaluate that from time to time. And step 6, identify your champions, right? So 5 and 6 kind of go hand in hand there, because those champions, they're the ones that are going to drive the adoption, right? They're curious, they're interested, they're encouraging to others. They don't let roadblocks stand in their way, right? So they keep on working with the product. Step 7, then, make ongoing training the standard. Ongoing training the standard. Yes, that's a necessary thing. Okay. As employees may see immediate gains with Copilot, it may take each user 6 to 12 months to personally evolve how they use Copilot on a regular basis. So it can take some time. And sometimes we can actually lead the way by kickstarting some of that. For example, telling or helping people with any prompts. What are the ingredients to a good prompt? Copilot adoption on Microsoft's website will help organizations to get an idea of what they can do to help drive adoption of Copilot. Phase 3 is deliver impact. And so step 8 in this is quantify impact with Microsoft Copilot dashboard. That dashboard helps organizations measure usage and adoption at every phase of the rollout, real-time data and assets, okay? Helping them to see just exactly how important it is. Notice step 9, get that multi-departmental, multi-rolled AI council together regularly. Talk about what works and what doesn't. Make those AI council meetings an ongoing priority well after the initial period has begun. Okay. Gains in productivity and business value will be evident at that point, but then now it's time to look a little bit more long-term. And then step 10, publicly celebrate the successes. So any new tools, if we get any successes, take a moment to celebrate those milestones. Phase 4 on extend and optimize. This is your long-term, right? Tailor Copilot to your business. Make sure you ground Copilot to all your business data. Automate your workflows with the agents. Create agents in the flow of work, right? So we can quickly create and publish agents directly into the applications that we use most often. You're going to find Teams is going to be a big one, right? You can put those agents right in there. People can communicate and interact with them and get the data they need right away. And then step 12, optimize with role-based agents. Okay, so Microsoft is continually releasing new Copilot agents out of the box, ready to go, tailored for a specific task. So take advantage of some of those. All right, let's take a look at managing secure access in Microsoft 365. Secure access. Okay, so we need to talk about conditional access policies and MFA, self-service password management, smart lockout, security defaults. One of the tools that we have, and we've talked about this before, conditional access. This is pretty much the same image we saw before. But basically what you're looking at is there's a bunch of signals. Those signals will come from users, the devices, the apps they're using, what their risk level already is. And those signals combine. And what we do as administrators is we build the rules so that if these signals are of certain values, we build the conditions, then we'll allow access. Or perhaps there's something that's not quite right. Like maybe the device is right, the user's right, the apps are right, but they're coming from a different location. Well, perhaps we want to now enforce MFA on that user. Or maybe there's some things that just say, hey, look, it's time to block access. And so we can use conditional access policies to help us with identifying those users, but then also Intune can come into play, and Defender for Endpoint as well. That's going to give us even greater insights. For example, Defender for Endpoint helps us with the risks. Intune will have compliance policies for those devices. So now that can come into play with our conditional access policies. Now we also have this feature known as security defaults. Okay, security defaults. And so security defaults is a pre-configured set of defaults that Entra can implement. So you'll note that by default, the security defaults is not on. And so when you've got security defaults turned on, well, there's going to be some things that are already turned on for all users, okay? Like MFA, blocking legacy protocols, requiring admins to perform MFA, okay? Entra Premium licenses do provide more advanced security features than what's in security defaults. So something to note is, you know, we just talked about conditional access. That kind of sounds like a good thing. Well, it is. But security defaults and conditional access are mutex, right? They are mutually exclusive of one another. You either use one or you use the other. Okay. So when you get in and you start digging into the rest of the module yourself for your homework, you're going to be able to cover a number of other features for security. All right, let's talk about managing roles and groups. Okay, managing roles and groups in Microsoft 365. And also permissions. So kind of need that too, permissions. All right, and so what are we going to take a look at? Well, it's going to be Microsoft 365 permission model, role management, best practices, delegation, and fun stuff like that. All right, the use of roles. Roles are a big deal. So you probably heard of RBAC. I think we even talked about RBAC. And so RBAC is a big thing. And so when we look at the Microsoft 365 permission model, it's based on RBAC as well. You have your roles. These are going to be collections of permissions. And there's two different types of roles. You've got your built-ins. You also have your custom roles, as we've talked about. And so you've got the roles, which are a named set of permissions, and then you have your scopes. Now the scopes are going to filter or limit the range or extent of a role. Okay, so for example, you can apply a scope to a role to limit its effect on a specific group, department, location, or domain. Okay, two different types of scopes, either a directory scope, okay, so it's based on an organizational structure in Microsoft 365. So like in a group or a site or a team. And then you also have management scopes, okay, based on services or applications in Microsoft 365. Okay, so like applying it to Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, or Teams. And so you've got the role, you've got the scope as to where it's going to be applied, and then you have the assignment. Okay, so who is going to have what permissions on these resources? And so that's what the assignment is. It's going to link the role and scope to a user or group. And so you can use either a direct assignment, meaning I take this user and I'm putting them in here, or I take this group and I'm going to assign them to this, or I can base it on indirect assignments. And so it's made indirectly through a membership or a rule. They're more dynamic and flexible than your direct assignments. And if there's changes in membership, then the grant or revoke for those permissions can occur automatically. There are types and categories of roles in Microsoft 365, main types being your global roles. These are the highest level roles that grant permissions to tasks on all Microsoft 365 features and services. You have your service specific roles, such as an Exchange administrator or SharePoint administrator. And then you have your feature specific roles. Okay, these roles will grant permissions to perform tasks in a specific feature or function, like, for example, a security administrator or a device administrator. Okay, those are tied to features. And the main categories of roles will be administrator roles, ones that can do administrative tasks, reader roles, ones that can view information but not make changes, and then application roles. So these roles will grant permissions to access and use certain Microsoft 365 apps, and are typically assigned to users that need to work with those applications. Now, in regards to managing role access, okay, admins can maintain roles in different places. And so we've seen this little chart before. You've got the Microsoft 365 Admin Center to maintain role information for Microsoft 365. Okay, so this will allow for managing things like users and groups. Azure RBAC, service-specific permission management, like for Exchange Online and stuff like that, and your application and app permissions. Okay, so you've got your Microsoft 365 Admin Center. You've got your Entra ID portal. Okay, so this is where you set up conditional access and the policies associated with that, passwordless authentication, risk-based authentication, right? So all of these are handled in the Entra ID portal. If you're wanting to control what happens with Defender, you go into the Defender portal. This is where your threat investigations take place. And so allowing security analysts to investigate and respond to security threats. You've got your incident management, where we can track, manage, and collaborate on security incidents, and to triage and even assign ownership and track the progress of our incidents. This is where advanced hunting happens in the threat analytics and integration with Microsoft 365 services. Okay, so Defender portal will integrate with the security services like Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Office 365, Defender for Cloud App Security, right? And so it gives you a nice holistic view of the organization as a whole. And then Purview, this is for data protection. Okay, so we've got the features of things like compliance management. So we've got our compliance policies that we can put into play. Those will be based on industry regulations and requirements. We have our data protection for things like DLP, information barriers, sensitivity labels. We have our risk assessment and insights, looking at things like our compliance score to help us to see how we can do better in being in compliance. And then we have our e-discovery and legal holds, right, for discovery and preservation of data for legal and regulatory purposes. Compliance reporting and auditing. Okay, so if an organization needs to monitor and audit compliance activities in the organization, they've got that capability. They can run their compliance reports. They can create custom reports, and that will help them to hold or adhere to the regulatory requirements that are out there. And lastly, you've got your collaboration and training. And so that portal for Purview allows for you to enable cross-functional teams to work together on compliance-related tasks. So you've got a few portals that will help you with managing the Microsoft 365 ecosystem. When it comes to administrator roles, just as a reminder, right, there are admin roles for services like Exchange. There's a global admin for all things, right? You've got your SharePoint admin and Teams. But when it comes to the GAs, the global admins, assign 2 to 4. Make sure that for your users as a whole, assign the least permissive role, and make sure that your MFA is turned on for your admins. All right, some best practices when configuring your admin roles. Number 1 is on the list, manage to least privilege. So you've heard of that principle of least privilege before. Make sure that people have just enough access and capability to do their job and nothing more. You reduce your risk when you do something like that. Number 2, use PIM, right? PIM, Privileged Identity Management. Not only is it good for keeping an eye on what your admins are doing, but also makes it so that we've got just-in-time access for a specific period of time. Once that time frame expires, it goes away, right? That capability goes away. Number 3, turn on MFA, okay, for all your admin accounts, 99.9% less likely to be compromised. Number 4, configure recurring access reviews. Okay, in other words, you're evaluating access. Who belongs to what roles? Do they still need to be in there? Number 5, limit the number of GAs to less than 5, like you saw, 2 to 5, 5 at the max, right? So that's what's recommended because of how powerful that role is. The more people you got in there, the more chance for a problem. Something that's recommended, keep 2 break glass accounts. 2 break glass accounts. What does that mean? Well, that means that if something happens to one of the GAs or all 5 of them, we still have a way in. Okay, so if you're interested in reading about that, look at Microsoft's documentation on break glass accounts for Entra. Number 6, use groups for Entra role assignments and delegate the role assignment. Okay, so assign roles to groups instead of to users. If you are using users now, the more users you have, the more it's like herding cats, right? So put them into groups and then put those groups into those roles. Number 7, use cloud native accounts if at all possible. Okay, organizations should avoid using on-prem synced accounts for any role assignments. Reason behind that is that if an on-prem account gets compromised, it can compromise also your Entra-based resources. All right, and then assigning those admin roles. Okay, so Microsoft 365 administrator roles do tie to specific administrative functions. And so just some things to note, each admin role maps to a business function. So Exchange admin to Exchange, SharePoint admin to SharePoint. And so if you're an admin in one, that does not mean you're an admin in any other one, right? You're administrating this and that is it. Okay? So a user can be assigned multiple roles. So I want you to take control of our communications. Great. So I'm going to put you in Exchange and Teams admin roles. Okay. So those are the roles that you get to work with. Note that to assign admin roles, you need to be a GA for that. And so GA can assign all the other roles. And GA includes all that the service administrator roles, not just these 4. However, there are some roles that GA is not part of by default. So I'll let you do your own research on that, but it does have to do with security. All right. Then this one, delegate admin roles to partners. The idea here is if you're working with a partner, you're having them administer your Microsoft 365 environment, be sure you trust them, right? Because they can do stuff on your behalf. Okay, so the partner can assign roles to support agents in their organization or to users in the customer's organization. Okay, so just be careful, make sure you trust them, and then choose the level of administration that you want to use. Role groups. Okay, role groups enable organizations to assign roles to a group instead of individuals. Easy addition and removal of users from a role. Okay, so the roles, it's a good idea to take a group and add it to a role rather than add a user to a role, because that just becomes unwieldy after a while. So there's some huge benefits of creating a group that's for a specific role. Okay, and so the benefits: simplifies the role assignment process. It also improves your security and compliance posture. Users only have the permissions that they need in order to get their work done. And it can help enhance productivity and collaboration. So role groups actually help with this because admins can provide them with the appropriate and sufficient permissions to access and use the services and features they need in order to get their job done. Okay. One of the things that I like about role groups is, let's say that a new hire is brought on and they're going to be working in the front line, right? So we'll create the, tier 1 tech support. And so what does tier 1 tech support have access to? Whatever I've assigned that group to do, right? So it's a good idea to have a practice of creating these role groups or taking advantage of them. Use the role groups that are already built in, if at all possible. Like, for example, maybe there's a help desk administrator or a reports reader role. Use those. If those don't work, create your own. Okay. Note, only create custom role groups when necessary. Okay. As I mentioned the other day, if I create my own role group or my own roles or anything like that, those don't get maintained by Microsoft. Only the ones that are built in do. So if a new functionality comes along, or maybe even a new exploit associated with a role, well, Microsoft will make those changes. If I've created my own roles, that isn't going to work out. Okay, it's not going to automatically propagate to me. And so you can create your custom role groups in Microsoft 365, in Entra, through PowerShell as well. Note your role group restrictions. You cannot change a role group into a non-role group. Only GAs and privileged admins can create role groups. Then you've got SharePoint permissions that we can take a look at. Okay, SharePoint permissions. And so services like SharePoint and Copilot for Microsoft 365 utilize all data to which individuals have at least view permissions. Okay, so that might include broadly shared files that the user's unaware of. So users might see applications as exposing content that was overshared, right? So oversharing leading to sensitive information being bled out to unintended recipients. End users, while they're well-intentioned, might not always grasp the implications of their sharing choices and might overlook permissions, or might even just want to do things easily rather than being concerned about the security. So what do we need to do? Well, step one, review site level sharing controls and remove everyone except external users from the people picker. Okay, so by default, SharePoint allows users to share out their content with a nice wide audience, including internal and external users and collaborators. So admins need to encourage users to assign permissions at the site or library or even folder level thoughtfully. Important that they educate users by raising awareness about the effects of oversharing and the importance of setting appropriate permissions. Okay, now this piece, everyone except external users. Okay, it's a convenient way to share content broadly in the organization, but it can lead to oversharing inside the organization. Okay, so it is still a nice setting because it includes internal users and excludes external users. So if the data is shared this way, it could inadvertently reach external parties, right? So to prevent oversharing, make sure you review your controls and also eliminate the everyone except external users option. So only authorized individuals can get to content. So there may be some training that's going to be involved in that, and get rid of some of those high level broad scope permissions like the everyone except external users group from the people picker. Number two, identify inactive sites and then restrict access or delete them. Okay, this is once again one of those things. If you've gone through and you've evaluated your content, you'll note, hey, this particular site isn't being used anymore. We need to do something about that. Okay, so you can go in and turn it to read only or even delete it. Number three, identify potentially overshared content, right? So a SharePoint admin can run reports in the admin center to look for broad sharing activity happening, let's say over the last month. And SAM, or SharePoint Advanced Management, has the capability of data access governance reports. Okay. So you can take a look at that detail. Step four, take remediation actions. So if you have noticed that there is oversharing, configure a restricted access control policy. Okay, and for any of those websites. And so as a result, all the existing access to the site is restricted to only the group of users configured by the admin. And then if you have high profile instances, you should determine who, how, and when the oversharing took place. So you can always look at change history as well to show how that oversharing took place. Okay, and then number five, set restricted access control and block file download policies on business critical sites. Okay, so just a couple of things that can be turned on. One of them that I like to use is that block download policy. Okay, and you can also block the download of Teams meeting recordings. Okay, because anymore you could feed those into AI and say, hey, give me a transcript of this, and then it takes a little time, but eventually it yanks out all the words and turns it into text. Let's talk a little bit about DLP. Okay, so like I mentioned, yeah, we've got some things we've already kind of covered a little bit of, but we need to also see how this comes into play when working with our AI tools, right? So DLP, data loss prevention, is something that we can pay close attention to. And so some common steps to plan a DLP implementation: look at who the stakeholders are, right? And then describe the categories of the sensitive information that they work with, okay? So that might be business processes or something like that, but it could be like financial data or private data. Then set some goals, create an implementation plan. So once the stakeholders define which sensitive information needs protection, then we could put a plan together on how to protect it. This should include things like the steps required to implement the plan, how it addresses discovery of sensitive items, training the end users, tuning policies. Okay. Then you move on to mapping out the path from start to the desired end state. Okay. So put all that together, and that's important because that will kind of define some milestones and stuff as well. And it's key to communicating with stakeholders and letting them know the plan, the game plan, right? Discover those sensitive items. A lot of different ways to do that, and where they are and what they are. So an organization may have sensitivity labels in place, or maybe deploy a broad DLP policy to all locations that only discovers and audits items, right? So remember when we talked about DLP, one of the options was don't turn it on yet, just let it sit there and run for a little bit so that we could see what sorts of things might be impacted by this policy. Then you've got your policy planning, okay? A whole series of questions on how we're going to roll it out. Think about the prereqs as well for it, and then deploy the policy. One thing I do recommend, make sure that it's in a tested out mode first to see what it's going to do. Train your end users for sure, because you don't want them to just hit walls, right? So, and the good thing to do is when you deploy your DLP policy and you put it in test mode first, you're going to be able to see the behaviors of your users. Okay, here's what they typically are doing. And so that will allow you to customize the training to the behaviors of the users. And then last one, review your DLP requirements and your update strategy. Now note that when you go through this entire process, those last two little squares here on the screen, monitor outcomes and tune your policies, those will happen frequently. Okay, so you'll start seeing, hey, it's too restrictive. Great, so we make a change. Now it's not restrictive enough. So then you go back in, you tune it, and you test it out again, right? So you'll be stuck in that little loop there, probably for the eternity of that DLP. Okay. All right. Purview's DLP policies. Okay, so Purview does have DLP policies that you can work with. One of them is a default policy for devices. Okay, so this is going to notify the organization when a user shares email or documents that contain sensitive info with someone outside of their organization. Okay, so that's something that can be done. Yeah, they can receive a little tooltip and all that stuff as well. But then there's also your DLP default policy for Teams. And so Microsoft took Purview DLP to go into Teams chat and channel messages as well. Because what you don't want, even internally, you don't necessarily want people to share credit card information or source code or HIPAA information, PII, right? So when you get in and you turn that particular feature on, notice it will be turned on by default for all users in the tenant. It does generate an alert, okay, triggers a low severity email to an admin, and then an admin can react on that. So when it comes to designing that DLP policy then, okay, lots of steps that are involved here. Number one, plan for data loss prevention. This is just make sure that it just gets put into place, right? Plan on it. Number two, understand all of the components of a DLP policy and how each one influences the behavior of a policy. There's a lot of things to configure. So this might take a lot of testing before you even start doing it with your organization. Number three, familiarize yourself with the DLP policy templates. Number four, develop your policy intent statement with your key stakeholders. Number five, determine how the policy fits into your overall DLP strategy. Number six, map the items in the policy intent statement to the configuration items. Okay, so that will be a big one, right? So you need to begin by breaking down the draft into little segments and then figure out what it's going to impact. Number seven, determine which policy template that you're going to start from. Is it going to be a predefined one or is it going to be a custom one? Number eight, go through the template, assemble all the information required before you build the policy. Number nine, document the configuration. Oh, yes, please. Document all the policy settings, review them with your stakeholders. And number 10, create a draft policy and refer back to your policy deployment plan. Okay. If you wanted to create a custom DLP policy, you can actually take advantage of a template. This is just to tell you, hey, you've got 40 different ready-to-use templates that an organization can use, and so you can start from that. So you don't necessarily have to start from scratch. Okay, easiest way to build a DLP policy is start with from one that already exists, and you can get in and customize it. DLP email notifications, right? So organizations can use DLP to look for stuff that's not quite right. So let's say somebody shares out a social security number or something like that. You don't necessarily want to block them from getting their work done. Instead, you can give them something like a tooltip, right? Hey, this looks like it's in conflict with a policy in our organization. So when you're doing that, you can use email or user in notifications, right? User notifications. You can use tooltips. You can also use an email notification if you wanted to. Okay, so you can customize who notification emails are sent to. That can even be the person that either inadvertently or on purpose did something. The email text, the policy tip text, that was part of it as well. Okay, so great for training, but also for keeping, let's say, your security admins in the loop. And so when an organization creates that policy, they can configure the notifications to send the email notification to whoever they choose and display that tooltip, okay, for the content that conflicts with the DLP policy. Note that your default email notifications have a subject line that begins with the action taken. Okay, so for example, it may say something like access blocked, right? And so an organization can also create a custom email notification instead of sending the default email notification to admins. So you could take advantage of certain tokens, like for example, what the applied action is. That'll show up as % applied actions %, right? So you can use that little placeholder, or % matched conditions %, for conditions that match that particular content. All right. Okay. Configuring policy tips for DLP. Okay, so policy tips are really nice for users. They can notify a person that the content they're working with is going to conflict with a DLP policy, right? So that'll notify them, a little bit of training as well. But you can also choose if you want people to override the policy tip, if you want them to report, hey, this shouldn't be notifying me, right? Or you could just say, hey, let's turn those notifications on or off. Okay, now this may keep a user from knowing that they've done something, right? But override and report are some options there. And these can appear in a variety of different places in SharePoint, on OneDrive, in their Office documents. Okay, so they can get these little policy tips in a variety of different places. Okay, sensitivity labels. Sensitivity labels is another one to take a look at. And so sensitivity labels allows for us to define the level of sensitivity for some of these of some of the content and the places that we're working with, right? So we can apply the proper administrative permissions and deployment strategies and all that stuff. In fact, when it comes to a deployment strategy for our sensitivity labels, okay, an organization should create a project team that does identify and manage things like business and technical requirements, or the proof of concept testing, even internal checkpoints and approvals and final deployments for the production environment. So rather than building a whole lot of labels at one time, it may be good to just build a small amount of them. In fact, some organizations may not have a whole lot of labels because the few that they built are good enough. Okay, so when it comes to prioritizing how labels need to be put together, they can address one or two key scenarios that map to the most impactful business requirements. Okay? And then create and configure those labels for those situations, see how successful they are, make any needed modifications, and then lastly, repeat the process for the next set of impactful scenarios. Okay, so you could take a nice big overview of your organization, see what's going to be the most immediate impact, and then work with that. Now, organizations should include that particular strategy in what they do. And notice that last little bullet that's listed here, use the label policy setting, provide users with a link to a custom help page. So as you build these labels, you can actually give them the opportunity to learn a little bit more about it, right? To see why they're using this label or how to use that particular label. When it comes to working with SharePoint and OneDrive, well, we put a lot of stuff in SharePoint and OneDrive, don't we? And so two primary reasons why an organization should enable sensitivity labels for Office files and PDFs in OneDrive and SharePoint. Note, so that its users can apply the sensitivity labels on the web, and so that SharePoint and OneDrive can process the contents of those files that were encrypted using a sensitivity label. Okay. The label can be applied in Office for the web or Office desktop apps and then uploaded or saved into OneDrive. But note, unless you enable sensitivity labels for SharePoint and OneDrive, they cannot process these encrypted files. So as a result, data loss prevention, co-authoring, and stuff like that just is not going to work. So when you do get in and you enable sensitivity labels in SharePoint and OneDrive for encrypted files, then SharePoint and OneDrive can recognize the label and can process the contents of the encrypted file. Also, if the user downloads or accesses the file, the label goes with it, no matter where it's stored. In fact, permissions that were assigned with the encryption also get enforced, and so you can also take advantage of things such as auto-labeling for those documents. External users can access documents that are labeled with encryption by using guest accounts. And lastly here, eDiscovery supports full text search for those files, and DLP policies support content in these files, right? So eDiscovery can also benefit from when you've enabled the sensitivity labels. Okay. So what are some requirements for setting up these sensitivity labels? Well, number one, you need to create your labels. Right? So if you want to utilize these labels, you got to create them. And so creating a name and putting those labels together is going to be really important. Make sure that you have a taxonomy for different sensitivity levels of content. Maybe some common terms like personal or public or general, confidential, highly confidential. Take advantage of something like that. Next one, define what each sensitivity label can do, right? So configuring the protection settings that you want on it. You may want lower sensitivity content, like with using the general label to have just a header or a footer applied, whereas higher sensitivity ones, you might want encryption or even watermarks put on it. And last one here, publish those labels. Okay, so after you're done configuring them, push them out, they can then start being used by your users. When it comes to creating them, when you're in Purview under information protection, you could take a look at the labels and create a label. Okay, so a nice easy spot to build those sensitivity labels. Okay, so once you get in there to build them, then excuse me, then you have the ability to publish them out and start using those labels. So once you've created them, created the sensitivity labels, create one or more label policies. One or more label policies. Okay, so this is going to assign the appropriate sensitivity labels to the policy and also configure those policy settings. Note that most organizations only require multiple label policies if their users need different labels or different policy settings. Many organizations will just have one label policy for the entire company. So once you build the labels, then put them into a policy and then publish that policy out. And when it comes to publishing of those sensitivity labels, note that your sensitivity labels are published by creating that label policy. And by default, tenants don't have any label policy, so you'll need to create them. Once you create the labels, don't forget to create the policy and then publish that policy out. Okay, so once you're done creating the labels, choose to publish the label. That's going to start the create policy wizard and then publish it out. Just note it could take up to 24 hours for it to take effect. Okay, so there may be some replication that needs to take place with it, and so it may take some time for that label to finally be out there. Removing and deleting those sensitivity labels. So in production environments, we may want to remove that sensitivity label. That's less risky than deleting it, and so you can always add it back later if you need it. But if you remove a label from a label policy and so that label is no longer published to the original specified users, the next time you refresh the policy, the users won't see that in their Office apps. But if you've already applied that label, well, the system won't remove it from the content or the container. If you delete the label applied encryption, well, it's actually going to be archived so that we can still decrypt the contents of files. If you've stored your documents in SharePoint or OneDrive and you enabled sensitivity labels, then note you can't see the label that's applied to the app anymore and the name no longer shows up. If you store your documents outside of SharePoint or OneDrive, or you haven't enabled sensitivity labels for Office files or emails, when you open content, the label information metadata remains, but the label ID to name mapping won't, right? So you don't see the name anymore. Okay? So there are some differences between removing and deleting. Now let's talk a bit about managing the Microsoft 365 Copilot extensibility. So we're going to just briefly touch on this one. Okay. And so one of the things that we can do, we talked about this towards the beginning, is the fact that we can add on or enhance the functionality of Microsoft 365 Copilot by introducing agents. Okay. And so those agents and the Copilot functionality can be enhanced for things like search capabilities, custom actions, connectors, and APIs. Okay. And so when it comes to managing those agents, we could go through the Microsoft 365 Admin Center to customize this. Okay. And administrators can manage those agents in the integrated apps page in the Admin Center. Okay. So agents will appear on the page as available, deployed, or blocked for an organization. So from that page, admins can block or unblock agents. They can assign or unassign agents, or even deploy or remove those agents. Okay. So admins can see the agents that are available to be deployed by going through integrated apps, look at the available apps, and then choose Copilot for host products. So now they're going to be able to see any of the apps that are available. Once they figure out the apps or the agents that they want to work with, well, then they can choose to publish those agents. So bringing a Copilot agent to life in the organization actually is a collaborative thing. And that process begins with developers that harness their technical expertise to create and configure those Copilot agents. So those agents are ready to go, right? So an agent can be deployed for the organization. So once a developer submits their Copilot agent for approval inside of Copilot Studio, which is part of the Power Platform, then an admin must publish the agent in the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. Okay? So the admin can discover the app. They can see that it's under Requested Apps tab in the Integrated Apps. They can choose the pending application, review the metadata that's associated with it, and then either approve or disapprove by either choosing to publish or reject. All right, how about monitoring our graph connectors? Monitoring our graph connectors. Well, monitoring the connections you build between data sources and Microsoft Graph connectors, that's critical for administrators, okay? Because that's where your data is tying in to Microsoft 365, okay? So it's essential for the health and the performance of the company, and also for Copilot. So admins who actively monitor those connections can actually provide a reliable and efficient search experience meeting the needs of the organization. So this means that we're able to ensure the freshness and accuracy of the data, making sure the data is indexed by Microsoft Search and that it's up to date and accurate. And so look for and monitor that particular thing. Detect and resolve errors. So connection errors can be encountered for a variety of reasons, like maybe changes in the source system, maybe authentication problems, perhaps a password or an authentication technique was updated, right? So if an admin is monitoring the connections, then they're able to get that taken care of quickly. Managing crawl schedules. So admins can configure and manage those crawl schedules to determine how often that data does get indexed. Optimizing the search performance as well. So admins who monitor the state of connections can ensure the search infrastructure is performing optimally, okay, and looking for bottlenecks or performance issues, and then even take steps to mitigate those. They can even strengthen security and compliance. So admins can ensure that only authorized users have access to that indexed data and that it's being handled properly. And lastly, the ultimate goal, improve the user satisfaction. And so administrators should monitor the data sources tab on the search and intelligence page so when you're in the Microsoft 365 Admin Center, under settings, look for search and intelligence, and then look for the data sources tab. And this will tell you the current condition of it. Is it syncing, right? So that means that the connector is crawling the data from the data source to index it. Is it ready, meaning that the connection's ready, no active crawls going on, it should be fresh. Is it paused, right? So the next crawl only runs when the administrator resumes it. Did it fail? Now you're gonna have to do some research, right? Or the delete failed, so the delete of the connection failed. So that data might still be indexed, maybe an item quota might be still consumed or something like that, okay? So an admin does have some work to do when it comes to the Microsoft Graph connectors. So far, what have we covered? Lots of stuff, right? From Copilot to security defaults and conditional access through to DLP and SharePoint permissions, sensitivity labels, and Copilot extensibility. When we come back in a few minutes, let's see if this works. No. Okay. Oh, it does work. Look at that. Okay. When we come back in 5 minutes, we will keep on going, and we're going to dig into the last piece of today. Have a good break. Thanks. All right, that was 5 minutes. Welcome back. We're gonna dig into the next piece here, and this is gonna go kind of quick because yeah, we're getting down to the nitty gritty here. But creating agents in Microsoft Copilot Studio. So this all comes out of that PL 7008 course, and so we're gonna take a look at this now. Copilot Studio does give you a lot of tools to help you to build agents quickly based on any business scenarios that you're working with, and working with customers, employees to easily interact with as needed. Okay, so we're going to talk about first what an agent is, building that initial agent. Now, first, one of the things that you have is the ability to build that agent in Copilot Studio. Okay, create that agent in Copilot Studio. So you can get into the Copilot Studio and start building that particular environment out. And one of the things I really appreciate about the Copilot Studio is that now all you have to do is kind of describe what you want. Okay, describe what you want. And so Copilot will help you to build Copilot. Right? And so you've got your Copilot Studio. Once you get in, notice it says describe your agent to create it. And so Copilot is helping you up here. Of course, you've got a list of Copilot agents down below that you can work with. Okay, these are all pre-canned. You notice that they're listed as managed agents or agent templates that are here. Okay, but you could choose your environment that you're going to work with, right? So you can actually have several different environments. But then you determine the environment where you're going to build it. So if you're familiar with working with Power Platform, make sure you have a environment that you want to build your stuff. This is created by your Power Apps admins to define the security boundary for your apps in an organization. And really that environment determines the functionality and the services available for that agent. Once you select the environment, create the new agent using natural language to describe it, and be thorough, be in depth, tell it what you want, like make that a really long box, right? Fill in as much as you possibly can in there. Okay? Or you can just go in and build your own if you want by hitting the create button. Okay? But the description piece builds you a nice framework. I'm going to tell you it saves a ton of time. Okay, so you may end up with a couple things that perhaps you didn't want, so you can always get rid of those, but you can nonetheless start off with something really nice. You can even base your agent on a template if you wanted to. They're provided for common scenarios. Okay, and then once you get in and you create that new agent in Copilot Studio, right, you can hit the create a new agent and then do it by hand if you wanted to. Okay, there's a variety of templates to be able to work with in here. You can start with a template if you wanted to. One of the things that I suggest to anybody, especially if you're new to working with Copilot and Copilot agents, is use the chat, right? Describe in natural language what you want. All right, now once you get in and you start the process of creating an agent, okay? One of the first things it needs a name, right? So you give it a name. You can assign it a explain the language that you want it to be in. Okay, so you can add an icon as well. This is going to represent the agent itself. Notice PNG format, less than 30K in size, so it should be a tiny little guy. Okay, and then build out the description, okay, which should be good, and then the agent instructions. Okay, and so direct the behavior of the agent, including its tasks and how it completes them. You can actually put in bullet points in this as well. Okay, so you could say, hey, you need to do this, 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 and this. Now, part of your instructions as well, look at this as being like your very first prompt engineering for this particular particular agent. Okay, because that particular agent will follow the instructions that you supplied to it. Okay, so make sure that you put in good instructions. Okay, so determine the resources to call to address a user query, or is it an autonomous trigger? Fill in your inputs for any tool based on context, generate a response to the end user, put all that in there, okay? And when you get in and you actually start building the instructions, make it as clear as possible, describe its role, describe its scope, what it should do, what it should avoid, any context, like what does the agent need to know, what's the background, how do you want the agent to respond, right? Should it be kind yet professional? Should it be humorous, right? And then what to do if you're not sure, okay? So error handling should be added in there as well. So those instructions should be absolutely awesome for that agent. Okay, that's going to give that agent so much to be able to work with. You also notice down towards the bottom, there are starter prompts that are listed here. Okay, so you can add in some starter prompts that can help you choose from how to start a conversation with the agent. So sometimes people come in, and you've probably seen this on some websites before. You know, you get little options in the little chat box, and you can pick one, right? So that's a nice starter prompt there. Right, but then another huge piece is add in those knowledge sources, right? So what it is that it's going to use for knowledge. You can also do some advanced settings, and so these could be things like a specific solution we're going to take advantage of, any schemas that we're going to be utilizing as well. Okay, and so we've already talked a bit about the agent with Copilot, creating that. So use the natural language, right? Create an agent with natural language. And so you can put in the description and all that fun stuff for that particular agent. Now, there are also topics, right? You can work with topics in your Copilot Studio. So Copilot Studio is going to be the crafting ground for your agents, right? So one of the things to take a look at is that there are agent topics that we could take a look at. And so when working with topics, that's going to represent paths that a customer can be taken on while they're interacting with the agent. And so the topic used, the path followed within the topic, is in response to the data that's typed in by the customers in the conversation panel. Okay, so you could choose a topic, right? Start building topics, many topics if you wanted to. Topics are actually that primary element that dictates how the conversations are going to flow. So if a customer asks about the weather, well, guess what? The agent can launch a weather topic, right? So they can define those sorts of things. And so you've got topics that you can work with, okay? So for example, a topic of conversation start, right? So greets the users, introduces the agent and its capabilities, and so triggered when an agent first engages a user in conversation. You've got conversational boosting, so creating generative answers from external data sources when a agent can't find a match for the user query. End of conversation, right? So this confirms with the customer that their query is answered, triggers from a redirection, and calls this topic from your custom topics when you're ready to end a conversation. Okay. Escalate, so that will inform customers if they need to speak with a human, right? And so triggers when talk to agent is matched or the escalate system event is called. Right? So these are ones that are built into the system. Fallback, right? So informs users their query couldn't be matched to a topic and then asks them to try again. And so that triggers when the agent can't match the user's question or message to a topic. Multiple topics matched, okay? So prompts users to choose their intended topic and sets a system variable to identify the topic that's been triggered. And triggers when the user's message closely matches multiple topics. So kind of, can you narrow this down for me type thing. On error. Okay, so if something happens, if there's an error during the conversation, what do you do? Number 8 that's listed here is reset the conversation. It'll clear out the variable values, force the agent to use the latest published agent content, and it's triggered with a redirection. Number 9, sign in. So this will prompt the users to sign in when user authentication is enabled. And so triggers at the beginning of a conversation when users are required to sign in, or when the conversation reaches a node that uses authentication variables. So you can actually get in and manage the topics, right? So when you're in the studio, then you can start determining the different topics, right? So you've got your sample topics like goodbye, greetings. Okay, simple topics could be added in. Start over is listed in here, right? You'll notice you can also add your own topics. Right? Add your own topics. So you can build your own custom agent topics if you wanted to. Working with entities and variables in Studio, in Copilot Studio. Entities and variables. So Copilot Studio does allow organizations to quickly create agents based on business scenarios for their customers and employees so that they can interact, right? So things like topics can be created easily, no coding required, but the agent authoring functionality gives Copilot Studio a good spot to start for organizations to build these great copilots, right? These great little bots, you might say. And so one of the things that we need to work with is what are known as entities, right? Entities. And so when we take a look at entities, you know, agent conversations will use natural language. It's going to try to identify a user's intent based on what they put in the conversation window, right? So it tries to look beyond just the words, but to see the intent. So let's say somebody put, I tried to use my gift card, but it doesn't work, right? Natural language understanding is going to help to identify and even route the user to the topic related to gift cards that aren't working, even if the exact phrase isn't listed as a trigger phrase. Now, a key aspect in natural language is understanding to identify the entities being used in the dialog box. So think of an entity as an informational unit that represents a certain type of real world subject, like a phone number, a postal code, a city, person's name. Copilot Studio has a bunch of pre-built entities out of the box. Okay, so these represent some of the most used information types in real world dialogues. That can be things like colors, numbers, names. And that knowledge granted by entities allows the agent to recognize the relevant information from user input and then act on that or even save it for later use. So for example, let's use the pre-built entity city, right? City. Okay. Notice it's listed as a pre-built entity. Okay. It, like other pre-built entities, can be accessed from the Entities tab in Copilot Studio. And so when you examine the entity, you can see an explanation, right? Here's a little description and the way it can be used, right? So samples and examples of user input and what the saved value will show in the variable. Okay. So for example, when a user inputs our business headquarters are in Seattle, using this city entity, the agent knows Seattle represents the city type of information. So when the agent extracts the entity and saves it to a variable, it saves it as Seattle as the city, okay? Even though the surrounding information was other sorts of text. Okay? And so you can create your own custom entities as well. And as was mentioned, there are a lot of pre-built entities. Okay, and so person, location, numbers, dates, times, that's all stuff that's pre-built entities in the Copilot Studio. Now, when it comes to actually using an entity, like in a conversation, you could use them with questions. So once you've defined the entities, then they're available to be used when constructing agent conversations. And so the easiest way to use them is by opening the authoring canvas. So when you pop into the studio, and please do some experimentation a bit later, right? But when you pop into the studio and you take a look in the canvas, look for the topic and add a question node. Okay, that question node allows the agent to identify user submitted information using entities and then save this information as a variable. And so the identify function of a question node tells the agent what piece of information needs to be identified from the user query. So you'll notice question, what city do you live in? Identify city. There is the entity, right? And then we're going to save it as a variable into the variable user city as a type string. Okay, so when presented with the information in a conversation, the user simply needs to just type in the city or even put in a, something else, right? Like the city I am in is Seattle, and then it will populate that in there for them. So the agent will smartly recognize an identity, extract it, and then put it into a variable. Now we can also create variables in the Copilot Studio, creating variables. And so when we're in the in Copilot Studio, we're able to create these variables. In fact, variables can be created automatically when we add a question node to a topic and can be edited under the Save User Response As section. Okay? So by default, when a question node is inserted, it is created using multiple choice options. Okay, so you can even choose, notice, Save User Response As var2 choice. Right? Well, you can also go in and make some changes to that. Okay? Any pre-built or custom entity can be used by selecting it under the identify piece. And you can always go in and rename a variable. So if you don't like var2 because it's just like not very descriptive, you can rename the variable by selecting it and then entering a new name in the variable properties pane, making it easier to identify and use later. Okay. And so you can easily see what your variables are, right? In fact, you can even insert them into a message by hitting that little brace X close brace button. That's going to give you a list of your variables, whether they're environment, system, or custom variables, and you can pick the variable that you want to use, right? And then utilize that in whatever message or something like that that you're using. Note that when you define a variable in a topic, like through a question node, the user's answer to the question is populated to the variable associated with the question. And since you already have the value, no reason to ask the question again. That means that you can use it later on. You can also define the scope. Now, by default, a variable's value can be only used in the topic where it was created. Those are known as topic or limited scope variables. But agents can remember a variable context when a conversation spans multiple topics. Okay? These variables are referred to as agent variables. And so you'll notice that you can choose that the variable, right, is topic-based or global. That means any topic that's out there can take advantage of the value that's in this particular variable. Okay, so now we've got a couple key pieces that go along with these. Now, how do we build effective agents with Copilot Studio? Well, one of the things that we want to do is create conversations. And so your conversation node that you build will represent those customer interactions or the actions that can be inserted into a topic's conversation path. So they might be used to display a message to the customer. You might ask them for some additional information, maybe trigger an automation of some sort, or even trigger an escalation to a live agent. But when a new topic is created, it will include a trigger phrase node, right? And so that more nodes can be added by selecting the plus sign, right? So you can add more things to the output, or on that same line, or branch between or after a node. Okay? But this will allow you to keep a conversation moving. And there are different node types, like send a message. Okay, so this will display a message to the user, and messages can include some basic formatting and numbering as well. You may also have to ask a question, so that helps the agent to capture information from the user. And that captured info can be used to influence the flow of the conversation, or as variables in other parts of the agent, right? So when a question is asked, that could populate the value for a variable. You can also ask with an adaptive card. So this enables you to add a JSON snippet that can also be openly exchanged with other cloud apps and services. Kind of cool, right? And then lastly here, you can add a condition. So this allows you to add a condition to the topic flow. It can be used to direct users down specific paths based on if the condition is met or not. Okay, so a few different types of nodes that they can that you can work with. Variable management is another type. Okay, so you could set the value, you can parse the value, you can clear all variables if you wanted to. For topic management, then you can redirect the user to a different topic in the agent. You can transfer to a live agent, in other words, to a person, or you can end the topic or the conversation. You can also call an action. And what this is going to do is going to use Power Automate Cloudflow to help with interacting with external systems. And then for advanced, well, this is where generative answers, HTTP requests, events, and other sorts of things can be put together. So that may be also where your low code solutions come into play. Now, how do we enhance Microsoft Copilot Studio agents? Okay, just briefly here, a couple things to note. You can add a public website as knowledge. So doing what's known as grounding, right? Now, the idea behind grounding is you determine where knowledge sources should come from. Okay, so you can always say, hey, we want to pull from this specific public website. This is a knowledge source at the agent level that we're going to use this publicly available information to improve the reach of the agent. So if you want the agent to be able to respond to certain things, great. Ground that particular agent in some of that data. Supply it knowledge. Those knowledge sources are key to getting accurate and really information that's in line with your organization to be part of the responses that are brought back. Also, add a file as a knowledge source. Let's say that what you're working with is all contained in your standard operating procedures, which is in a Word document, and it's 80 pages long. Great, add that in as a knowledge source, right? So you can always throw that into something like a SharePoint site and then point to that. You can upload a file or individual documents to use as a knowledge source for the agent itself. The agent then uses that information to generate answers and responses back using the generative AI features. The reason why this was important to cover is because AI is in everything, including Microsoft 365. In fact, in recent times, I've noticed more, I don't want to call it intrusion, but more integration of Copilot into all of the Office apps, into Edge, on my desktop, right? AI is being plugged in everywhere. So it's important to consider it because, hey, it's becoming a reality in the world today. So we had to talk about it, and there may be some questions on it on your exam as well. So we did spend a bit of time with the creating agents in Copilot Studio, building an initial agent, talking about topics, entities, variables, scope, and then different types of nodes like sending messages and asking questions, and also adding knowledge sources as well. For your homework, yeah, you got a bunch here. Basically go through the learning paths that are associated with the PL 7008 course. and also the one that's associated with preparing security and compliance to support Microsoft 365 Copilot. Look into those different, oh, what are they? Applied skills as well to help you out. Okay. And those should be an aid to you. You will also note that there are some labs that are associated with this that can help you out as well. Okay. Let's take advantage of the labs. Today is day 4 of this class, and we appreciate very much you making it a point to be here today. Thank you for coming to day 4 of the MS-102 Microsoft 365 Administrator course. This will conclude day 4. Thank you. Have a good day.